I have recently finished this fun shirt and I am super excited to put it together today. Hi, I'm Christina and I love to digitally apparel pattern, creating unique pieces of wearable art and sometimes some wacky extra clothing. Today I'm super excited to be putting this shirt together. I am going to put it together with um, we're putting it together with a orange and white striped basic fabric to kind of get the fit down a little bit better, testing out the sleeve, see if I like it, and just kind of do just a basic fit test before I either put it out of my pumpkin fabric. I might leave it in this orange fabric because it's still kind of a Halloween-y thing. So we'll just have to see how it comes out in the end. So let's get started by projecting this out onto our fabric and get cutting. Once you have your pattern pulled up, you first will have to go down to this little bar at the bottom and put in the correct percentage to make sure that it is scaled to the proper size. I always then like to double check with my mat to make sure my inch by inch grid is lining up, nothing's too askew, and that my projector didn't mess up. Once that is done, I can move on over to my actual pattern and start lining it up. Next, it's time to lay out my fabric. I love having so much extra of this fabric so I can kind of test out some new patterns. So I'm going to lay this out on the fold, and I also want to make sure that the stripes are lining up side to side so it's not crooked. Now, I do know from a past experience that these stripes are not perfectly on grain, but it is more important for me to have the stripes be perfectly horizontal than it is for me to have it perfectly on grain. So I am going to take a little bit of time and kind of widget and make sure that those stripes are lining up top to bottom. This can be a hard thing to sometimes do, so sometimes it is better to not cut out on the fold, but to actually cut it out fully out. And then before you cut, make sure that you mark all your notches for your side seams and for the gathering under the bust. This is important. If you don't do it, you're gonna have to come back and do it. So just make sure you mark those notches. Then it's time to cut it out. I'm just going to use my rotary cutter, cut it out, and then once it's cut out, I'm going to mark my notches on the opposite side. And then I'm going to move my pattern over to cut the next one out. The next one I want to cut out is the fun little bat sleeve. Now this one is one that can definitely change quite a bit because of the stripes, you can actually move it to lots of different parts of the grain and kind of get different looks of how you want it. So the first thing that I would like to do is I always kind of like to lay the pattern out, see what it could look like, and then possibly actually start thinking about like, what if I put it on the 45-degree angle and everything? So this is kind of one of those things. If you don't have it fully figured out which way you want your grain to go, this is a really good time to take the time to kind of visualize it there. Since I'm still thinking about my batwing grain line and everything, I am going to go ahead and move over, and since I have this little scrap piece up here, I'm going to move up and start cutting out my sleeve. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure to notch all those elastic bits, and then I'm going to cut it out. I'm then going to move my pattern over, and I'm going to do the same thing for the other side. Now it's time to move on to the back of the pattern. Again, I want to make sure that those stripes are lined up. And now, since I already have the front pattern cut out, I have to make sure that I'm lining up the front with the back. So I always like to grab the pattern back out. That way I can double check, make sure everything's going to line up the way I want. So I have that pattern matching going. If you are not concerned with pattern matching, you don't have to worry about this. But as a seamstress who works with stripes, I always love to worry about pattern matching because when I see it on other people's shirts that are from like regular clothing stores, I kind of stare at the ill-fitting or the ill pattern matching stuff that happens. So I always like to do pattern matching. Once I'm happy with it, I will cut out each piece, making sure that I'm marking those notches before I cut out or before I pull the pattern up. And now we are back to that bat wing, and I want to put it on the 45-degree angle. I kind of want to have it going off my body, so it kind of does a little chevroning, not quite a full chevron at the bottom, and just kind of has the stripes kind of radiating out from my body. The next thing I also want to do is kind of make sure that the patterns will match up. Because I'm going at that angle, it's not going to be perfect. And then I'm going to mark my notches and cut it out. Then I'm going to do the exact same for the other side. So I'm just going to take my piece that I just cut out, line it up on my fabric, and use that as the pattern piece instead of actually trying to match up everything. This is a faster way to match up prints when your pieces are identical, and theoretically my side to sides should be identical as well. So I'm just using that piece as my pattern and getting it cut out. The last thing I need to do is I need to cut some binding strips for my neckline and for my sleeve. So I'm just going to cut a few strips here. I'm not going to go on the 45-degree angle for the neckline because I want the look of the stripes up and down with the kind of the dotted. But then for the sleeve and anything that I'm doing a full turn in for, I am going to go on that 45-degree angle to make sure I'm getting the most stretch out of it. Next, it's time to actually start sewing. I'm going to start by sewing my hems off first. There's a couple different ways you can actually do a hem, binding or bagging, but because this is kind of a test piece, I'm just going to go ahead and move over to my serger and do a rolled hem on all of my hems. Now I want to do this first because I'm going to be having 3 different pieces all coming into the hem there, and I don't want to cut off the point of the bat wing when I am doing the hem across the body from the front to the back. I'm going to start by doing each one of these little humps. I'm going to start in the middle and work out to the point, and then move to the other, go back to the middle and work out to the other point. This will help keep the serging nice and pointed right at the edge instead of trying to do a turn. Instead of trying to start at that point with a serger. Sergers don't really like to start at points, so this is the best way I have ever found to actually serge out to a point. Then I'm going to move and serge the hem. Again, I'm going to be working from one edge down to the point, and then I'm going to turn and flip it over, and then again I'm going to work from the other edge down to the point. This will make sure it's a nice pointed edge at the bottom instead of having it sometimes get a little wonky because we're trying to turn. Then we're going to move on to the back and do the exact same thing. Go from one edge down to the point, flip it over, and go from the other side seam down to the point. Now it's time to actually start sewing it all together. I did realize on 2 of my pattern pieces, I did not actually transfer the notches to the opposite side of my folded cut line, so I'm going to do that now. Then I'm going to just kind of line up those notches and see if I can stretch the top big enough to how much I'm gathering it in, and I can't, so I'm going to move over to my regular sewing machine and give me some basting stitches to help pull that in and control it. Sometimes you're able to just ease it in by stretching one and not really stretching the other, but I can't do that. We're going to help ourselves out and put in that gathering stitch to nicely create that seam. Then we're going to actually pin. We want to pin far enough away that it's never going to go under that foot and not cause any problems with the blade or needles. But I'm going to pin those notches and then use that gathering stitch to kind of pull in that fabric so that it is gathered in between the 2 notches where it needs to be. Get it nice and evened out just a little bit, and I'm going to put a couple pins right in the middle there and kind of just work with my fingers to make sure it's laying the way I want. There we go. Then we're going to go ahead and serge it. So again, this is why you want to pin far enough away so I don't have to worry about pulling my pins or anything right now. So I don't want those pins to go under the serging foot at all. There we go. Got it. We're going to pull those pins and take a quick look. Ooh, yeah, look at that. I like it. I like it. So now, once I have that done, it's time to move on to the back. So the back's just basically straight, but I still did pin it out of habit. And now it's on to adding the sleeves. So again, I am going to pin these in to make sure they line up where I want them to be, and then I can just do them right in a row, bam, bam, bam. So I'm just lining up my underarm seam and going up to where the cutaway is going to start. Then I'm going to make sure I'm doing that because since there is a right and a left, or there is a front and a back, I do want to make sure that I am cutting the front of the pattern to the front of the pattern and the back of the pattern to the back of the pattern. If you do it the wrong way, or if you grab the wrong patterns, you might have to redo it later. Then it's back to the serger, and I'm going to serge all these seams. Then it's time to actually serge up my side seam. So again, because I'm using the stripes, I'm going to make sure I'm giving myself some guidelines and pin it so it doesn't move. So first I want to line up my bat wing with one of my sides and make sure that it is faced the right way. So make sure you have the notches lined up and also the stripes lined up as best you can. Then once those are together, I'm going to then sandwich that bat wing in between the two side seams, and I'm going to pin it again. Again, because I'm pinning blindly, I want to make sure that I'm far enough away that I will never run over a pin and hurt my machine. So I am taking those pins out from underneath the two layers and pinning on top, and just making sure my waist seams line up and everything is looking good through all 3 layers. Now, you don't have to do this all in one step. You can sew or baste the bat wing to either the front or the back and then sew them all together. But I feel confident enough that I would be able to actually do it all in one go. Then once I'm ready to go, I'm going to just serge from one end to the other, making a turn right at the armpit. I'm going to pull my pins. So once again, I'm going to do it on the other side. I'm going to line up the bat wing with the stripes going down. I want to make sure the notches are right so that the proper sides of the bat wing are on the proper sides of the pattern. Then once I'm happy with that, I will move to pinning on the front to the back. So I have 3 layers here, and when you're doing those 3 layers, you do want to make sure they are all organized and good to go. And once you're happy with all of that, it is time to serge them all together. And that makes me really excited because now I have most of a shirt. If I just sewed up the shoulder sleeves, I would have a really good base of a shirt. But I'm not going to start with the shoulder seams next. I'm actually going to move over to kind of pinning on the elastic straps and kind of starting doing that crisscross. Now, I kind of played around with this in Clo, and I was hoping to kind of figure it more out in life while I'm doing this. So I'm just going to pin them around, see how I like the crisscrosses and everything, and then try it on and see how I like it. Time to give this shirt a try on. Now, I just have my sleeve safety pin and my shoulder safety pin on one side, just to give kind of like a final fit before I really truly start finishing everything off. I do need to take this in a little bit. I needed to plan a little bit more negative ease for myself, it looks like. So I'm just going to give myself a pinch right here, and then going to mark it. It's always easier if you can fit with somebody else, but sometimes you don't have that luxury, and you have to kind of make stuff work. Sometimes if I am needing to actually pin something more than just a little bit and I can't quite reach it, I'll try to mark it, take it off, repin it really nicely, and then go again. But I am loving this sleeve. I'm so glad I went on that diagonal because I feel like it really kind of continues nicely from there. But I am not loving the elastic look. Even if I tightened everything up and everything, it's just not, it's not hitting home for me. So I think I'm going to quickly redraft the sleeve, seam rip it out, and kind of get going. But other than that, I think this shirt is really coming along, and I'm excited to see how it finally comes out. But before I do that, I'm going to seam rip, and we're going to go back to the drafting board. And I think I'm just going to do a basic cold shoulder sleeve. And I might have it, instead of being circular, I think I might have it go to a point. And that's, I think, how I'm going to change that, is have it come down to a point, is more what I'm thinking now. So let's get back to the drafting board and seam rip this girl apart. Before I seam rip or do anything, I do want to take some measurements on how much I'm taking in. So I just want to make the note of that and write it down so that I can fix this pattern later. Then I'm going to go through the painstakingly slow process of seam ripping knits. I always find seam ripping knits is a lot slower than seam ripping wovens, just because it's harder to not catch the knits necessarily. So here we go. Long time. I am back in Clo, and I am going to change up this sleeve. So let's see here. We're going to do internal line 1. We're going to delete it. It's going to take a second. We're going to do the same with the other one. And we're going to bring this back down. Let's go ahead and delete all these notches. And I'm going to delete all the little internal separating dots for now. There we go. Oh, missed the top 3, I guess. There we go. That will just make it easier to merge these back together. You can leave them there, but then it just makes it a little bit more difficult. And we're going to merge. So it's like that. And then I'm going to still use those exact same points because that's what I have drafted. But all I'm going to do is I'm just going to come down in a V like so. And we're going to cut. We're going to move it up and archive it. That might be a little bit low of a V. I don't want it quite all the way down to my elbow. So we're actually going to just go back in my history just a little bit. So right before the cut, we're going to zoom in on it. And let's just shrink it up. Do 5 inches like that. And we'll try to cut it again. I'm just going to archive it really quickly. Yeah. I'm liking that even better. So we're going to go ahead and archive it on the other side as well. So we kind of have that fun little guy. Easy, easy. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to save as a new project. Shirt, new sleeve. And then I am going to export it in Adobe PDF. New sleeve export. I'm going to hit OK. Then I'm going to go in. We're going to open new sleeve export. Find what we want, which is this sleeve here. And release the clipping mask on it. We're going to copy it. Yes. Turn it. Then we're going to make it a little bit wider and give it an outline. And there we have our sleeve already. So I can go back to the projector and everything. Before I do that, I am going to go ahead and close this out. Only because it will cause me problems just because of how much stuff I have going on my computer. So I always recommend double checking and closing some stuff out if you don't need it active right then. So we're going to get my projector set up and going again, and we'll project this guy out. The first thing I need to do is make sure again that the size is set right. So I'm going to go back down, change my percentage to the correct percentage, and then I'm going to lay this guy out. Now I do want to make sure that it still matches up with my sleeve and everything. So I want to double check where I am putting the actual pattern and the stripes on the sleeve. Once I have one done, I'm going to go ahead and line it up on the other side. Now I want to see if I can get as close as I can up to this little cut I have up here. I'm not sure I'll quite be able to make it while making sure that the pattern is perfectly good, but it looks like I made it. So I'm happy with that. I'm going to go ahead and cut it out. This will help me save just a little bit of fabric on this fabric that I have way too much of, but it's always good for practice pieces and test pieces. And let me tell you how long it took me to seam rip all those pieces out, a really long time. So I am very much looking forward to this part going a little bit faster. So I'm going to start by lining up my arm size and just giving it a pin so that I know that I am pinning the front to the front, the back to the back, and I'm not doing anything weird and wonky. Sometimes you can accidentally, especially when you're serging, pin something both the same way and then you have to seam rip again. I definitely don't want that to happen this time, so I'm going to take extra care to make sure that it is all good because I don't want to seam rip on this project anymore. There we have one seam done, and we're now going to do all the other ones. Now, before I can actually do my side seam, I actually want to take it in a little bit because remember I pinned it in on my side seams a little bit so I'd have a little bit more negative ease. So I'm going to mark out my 1.5 inch I'm taking in on both sides of my pattern, and then I want to make sure that it has a nice line down to the other end. So I'm going to use a French curve and go down to my hem and then up into my armpit. Now, if it's not quite as nice as I want there, I could actually extend it into the sleeve a little bit, but I don't think I'm going to do that. And then I'm just going to trim that away so that I can serge it together right. I'm going to serge it together right away. Then I just need to copy that on the other side and on the back. You want to remember that when I pinned it out, I pinned out both front and back. There are times when you're fitting when you're only taking it out of the front or when you're only taking it out of the back, but on this one I'm taking it evenly out of the front and back. So you want to make sure you do it on both sides and both front and back pieces. Trim it away, and now we're going to be ready to do some sewing. So again, I'm going to line up that bat wing so that it is good to go. And now, because I have a little bit more curves and everything, the stripes might be a little bit more off than what I was planning, but that's part of the fun of making something without doing a full mock-up first. So we're going to pin in that bat sleeve, and then I'm going to make sure that I have my front to my back on the right side seam. I'm going to line up my waist seam and work out from there so that I know that everything is contained. I also want to make sure as best I can that front and back is lining up and looks really nice. Then it's back to the serger, and we're going to go ahead and serge those side seams. Now again, I'm going to make sure those pins are far enough away that they don't ever go under the foot or cause my serger any problems. There we go. Oh, I'm so excited to see how this turns out. Now it's time to actually do some binding. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to prep the binding for the bottom of the sleeve. Since I have it pointed, I need my bias in a V right there at the bottom. So I'm going to create a nice little V for the bottom. Then I'm going to take it and line it up on my sleeve. So I'm going to flip it to the right side, and I'm going to match right sides to right sides and start pinning. So I'm going to start at that V, pin it, and then pin all the way up. Now, because I did kind of change my neckline and change a few of my sleeves, or I didn't change my neckline, but I did change my sleeves, I have decided to keep all my binding on the inside and not do a little edging like I originally did. So now I'm using only my 45-degree biases and none of the ones that are on the grain. So I'm just going to work all the way around that sleeve, making sure to pin, and then we're going to sew it. Then, since I have them just long, I'm going to go ahead and trim off what I don't need. Then we're just going to move down and sew the binding on. When I get down to that point, I'm going to make sure to do a back stitch on either side of the point to really make sure that it is locked in there. And then all the way back up to the other side, back stitch. There we go. So that is the one sleeve. So I want to also give it a clip to the point. You want to make sure you clip to and not through that thread. If you clip through the thread, you're going to have to go sew it again. So make sure you clip just to it. Then I'm going to go ahead and give it a press open and then a press back to the inside. Always use an iron at all these steps. If you don't use an iron in between each sewing step, your garment can turn out looking a little bit bulky, a little bit like puffy, because you can't always get a really good press once stuff is actually fully stitched down. So we're just going to press it open and then press it back. There we go. So then I have the two sleeves done like that. It is time to actually move on to the neck binding. So again, I'm going to be using the bias strips and I'm going to fold it all the way to the inside. So I'm just going to sew all the way around, lining up my cut line to cut line for the front neckline as well as the back neckline. Once those are done, I'm going to trim what I don't need, move back over to the iron, and again, you guessed it, iron everything open, and then back to the inside. So I have all that contained and crisp for when I want to cover stitch it with a cover stitch to kind of hold it all together. Press open, and then in. There we go. And we're good. Now we're going to move over to the cover stitch machine, and I'm just going to go down one side of the sleeve. And then when I get to that point, I'm just going to do a little turn and go back up the other side. Make sure you're not catching extra flaps from other bindings. And then we're going to move, and then I'm going to trim away that excess. So you want to be extra careful as you're trimming it away so that you don't accidentally cut something you don't want to cut and have to start all over from the beginning. But I'm just going to trim it away so that this doesn't get caught on the other side of the binding when I'm sewing it down. Since my shoulder seam is only about 2 inches wide, I kind of want to make sure everything's kind of out of the way so I don't accidentally catch anything. Next, I'm going to go ahead and do the other side of the sleeve, down one side, and then once I get to that point, do a little turn and sew up the other side. Pull those threads out so that I can get a nice long pull, trim them, and then trim away that excess. Again, make sure you're being very careful. You don't want to make a mistake at this point. There it is. Next, we're moving on to the necklines. So I'm just going to go ahead and do the front neckline. Now you do want to make sure, again, that you're doing all of these stitch lines the same width apart from the edge. You want to make sure it's matching throughout your whole garment, so you don't want to do one really wide and one really narrow. That makes it not look clean at all. So when you're doing these, make sure you have picked where you're having them line up, whether it's right next to the edge of your foot, or if you're doing a little bit bigger or anything like that. So just make sure you're paying attention to that. Next, we're actually going to go and sew my shoulder seams together. It's coming together. I'm so excited. I just want to sew these together so that they don't move on me before I serge them. And I have them perfectly lined up just to give me a little bit more stability. Then I'm moving over to the serger, and I'm just going to serge it using a little bit of a back stitch there. So I have a double stitch right up top. And there we have it. One side done. On to the next side. We're going to serge one side, and then right as I get off the edge of the pattern, I'm going to pull it out, flip it around, and serge over it again. This is kind of a way you can do a back stitch on it. There we go. We're going to clip our threads. And then I'm going to move back over to my sewing machine, and I just want to top stitch that seam allowance down. It'll just help contain it and make sure it's holding where I want it to hold so that it doesn't kind of bulk up, because there is quite a bit of fabric right there and I don't want it to look super bulky when I try it on. There we go. Now it comes to the last hem. Since I have a different sleeve this time, I now have to go back and roll hem the sleeve edges. So I'm just going to do each one of them and try it on. Check it out. Woo! Look at those bat wings. Love it, love it, love it. And here we have it. We now have a completed bat shirt. And I am so happy with it. I think it is so cute. I may or may not have already flown all the way around my house, like flapping my wings. It is so much fun. I'm actually really glad I ended up in the striped fabric, and I don't know if I'm gonna actually turn it into the pumpkin fabric, because I really like how the stripes and the wings work together. So if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like and subscribe. And if you're interested in this pattern, you can find it in the description down below. I look forward to seeing the crazy bat shirts that you might make out of this, as well as any other pieces of wearable art. And I look forward to seeing you in some of my other videos. Happy sewing!